So as I wrap up our series on relationships, I didn't think we could do a series on relationships about, we're talking about the biblical basis of those relationships without admitting, without owning up to the reality and the truth that even the best relationships, they're going to have conflict. I mean, the strongest relationships, I don't care if it's your marriage, I don't care if it's your friends, I don't care if it's a coworker, I don't care if it's with your kids or your parents, even the best relationships, there's going to be conflict. Fights are going to happen. Tension is going to be there. Conflict is going to happen because when you get two people involved and they have a different of opinion, they have different makeup, they have different thought processes, disagreements are going to happen. And there's always a possibility for conflict, for fighting, for hurting each other and messing up with each other. And conflict is going to happen. And that's okay. Conflict is okay. Actually, it's more than okay. Conflict can be a really good thing for your relationship. But it's only when it's done God's way. Jesus said this in the book of Matthew. He says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. Jesus is making a very important point here. He says that there's times that conflict is going to happen. The Bible never tells us that you have a better marriage, that you have better relationships, that you have better friendships, that you have better relationships at work if you never have conflict. It doesn't tell us that. Conflict is going to happen, and so the question we need to wrestle with is how do we honor that conflict? How do we work through that conflict in a God-honoring way to make sure that it's productive and that it's helpful? That's what we're going to talk about this morning. How do we do that? Let me give you 3 biblical truths about conflict. The first one we've talked about, conflict is unavoidable. You know this is true. When two people are involved, there's going to be conflict. They're not going to agree on everything. There's going to be fights involved. There's going to be times that you get your feelings hurt. There are going to be times that you hurt the other person's feelings. There will be times that misunderstandings are going to take place. But again, conflict can be good. We've just got to learn to make it constructive. Second, conflict must focus on the problem, not the person. This one's huge. Conflict has got to focus on the problem, not the person. But when conflict happens in a relationship, it can be something that's really not even a big deal. Something that you're really not even passionate about. But when that conflict happens, man, it can turn very personal and it can turn very ugly very quickly because so often we focus on the person instead of the problem. Well, what started out something simple like, hey, you want to go get some ice cream after dinner? Can turn into, you're such a jerk. You always have to have your way. Oh, when you have a disagreement at work, it can quickly turn into, man, they're just stubborn. They're just ignorant. They're stupid. It can turn personal quickly. And instead of this non-emotional, rational discussion taking place, it turns personal. Things heat up, emotions get going, defenses go up, and what happens? You say things that you're going to regret. You say things that you shouldn't have said. And so for a conflict to be productive in our relationships, it can't get personal. We have to stay focused on the problem and not the person. And the third truth is this: conflict can honor God. It can. I don't want you to miss this. God can use your conflict, God can use your disagreements to grow your relationship and to grow your faith. If conflict is handled correctly, it can actually move your relationships past some roadblocks, past some stumbling blocks, and towards a better future. But for that to happen, the conflict has to be done in a God-honoring way. Romans chapter 12 says this, it says, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. See, when we embrace conflict in a God-honoring way, whether it's in your marriage or it's a conflict with your kids, maybe it's a conflict with a friend or a coworker, whatever it is, But when we embrace that conflict in a God-honoring way and we handle that conflict in a God-honoring way, it grows us and it grows the relationship. It makes it stronger. And so how do we do this? How do we do this in a God-honoring way where the conflict is life-giving instead of being destructive and life-sucking? How do we handle this in our life? I want to give you some biblical actions this morning that will help us embrace God-honoring conflict. The first one is this. Always listen first. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. We talked about communication and how we should listen more. But when you're in this disagreement, when this conflict is taking place, you need to be willing to really listen to the other person, to hear what they're saying, to hear what they are communicating to you before you talk, before you respond. So many of us listen partially so that we can get our comeback ready before they ever say what they say, and we miss so much. I really believe a lot of fights can have been avoided if we would just listen to each other. If we would listen to the other person before we start jumping to our conclusions and before we start speaking our opinions. We looked at the book of James 2 weeks ago. It says, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. If we would just listen first, it will help us prevent so many misunderstandings. It will give us some insight. When we listen, it will give us some insight to how the other person is feeling, what they are going through, what emotions they're experiencing, what they are thinking. I have found usually when you listen to the other person, you really listen to them and you don't interrupt them. You look them in the eye. You really listen to them and you take it seriously. I find that they are more likely to listen to you when you start to talk. But part of listening is the attitude that you have. It's the attitude you have. I'm going to teach you something that I read years ago. And I'm going to encourage you with this concept, this idea called read above the line. And let me explain what read above the line is. Now, when you get in conflict with another person, what happens? Your emotions start going up. Your feelings start going up. Your blood pressure is going up. And they start talking and conflict is happening. And you can receive what they are saying in one of two ways. You can receive it in one of two ways. You can receive it negatively. And as they are talking, you can assume the worst in them. And you can assume the worst by their statements, about what they are saying, and you can take it as a personal attack against you, and they may not mean it that way, but you can take it as a personal attack against you. That is reading below the line. And that leads to danger. Or you can receive what they are saying in the most positive way that you can do it. You can assume the best in what they are saying. You can trust that they want the best in this situation. You can trust that they have good intentions. That's called reading above the line, and it makes all the difference. See, Chris and I can get into a lot of conflict with one another, and I know that when I'm being rational, when I'm being sane, I'm really thinking about it, that Chris and I are good friends, and he's going to have my best in mind. And so I should always read above the line. And when I do that, conflict will be better. But be honest with yourself. Which one do you most naturally lean towards? When you're in the middle of a conflict with someone, do you tend to read above the line or below the line? Do we assume the best or do we assume the worst? See, when I don't listen first, I don't normally know where they're coming from. I don't know their motivation. And so I start to jump to conclusions, and I start to envision the worst, and I start envisioning where this conversation and where this conflict is going to go. And it just goes downhill from there because I'm reading below the line. A couple of practical examples. Let's just say that your boss comes to you and they say, hey, can you help with this project? Either one of you could do it. Can you help with this project? And you think to yourself, man, she's just being lazy. She's being selfish. She's giving me this junk project because there's a better project that I could be doing, but she wants to do it herself. See, that's reading below the line. Or something that might happen, maybe it's just my house. Your spouse says, hey, let's leave at 5:45. What do you do with that? What do you mean by that? Are you saying that I'm always late? Or are you saying that I'm the reason that we're always late to something? See, that's reading below the line. That's assuming the worst. But when I listen first and when I read above the line, I can hear their point of view. I can see where they're coming from. I can see their motivation. And I may not completely agree with where they're coming from. I may not completely agree with their motivation, but I can say to myself, well, they're not crazy. And we can have a better conversation. I can see where they're coming from, and that's reading above the line. But here's the point. The more I listen, the more I understand. And the more I understand, the better I am able to respond. And the better I respond, the better the other person is going to be able to respond to me as a result. And so the first step in a God-honoring conflict, having a God-honoring conflict, is always listen first. Second, never speak out of anger. This can be so hard. I know I'm not the only one here. This can be so difficult because the very nature of conflict, when we get in conflict, is what? It's confrontational. Conflict is confrontational. Whenever you feel threatened and whenever your emotions get involved, especially if we're tired, especially if we're frustrated, man, confrontation happens. When we're emotionally charged in this conflict, the anger is this natural result. And I'm not saying that you're never going to get angry. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're going to be perfect at this. That isn't going to happen. Because anger is a natural response to conflict. But we also have to own up to that anger is dangerous. It may be a natural reaction, but it's not the best reaction. Never speak out of anger. Because when we speak out of anger, what happens? Well, we say things that we normally wouldn't say. And we do things that we wouldn't normally do. And we say things that we normally wouldn't want to say. And honestly, we say dumb things. Things come out of our mouth, and we say things that hurt the other person, and we say things that cut the other person, and we start attacking them. And what happens? That the situation just escalates unnecessarily because we didn't choose our words. In Proverbs chapter 12, it says, some people make cutting remarks. Have you ever done that? Made a cutting remark? You were angry, the emotions were going up, you're in the heat of the moment, conflict is happening without even thinking about it. You made some comment that really cut the other person, really hurt the other person. You tore them down, you damaged them. It says some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. See, when you're in the midst of this conflict, when you have conflict with someone, be wise. Be wise. When you feel yourself getting angry, don't engage them. Don't engage the conversation when you feel your anger rising. Wait until you cool down. Because when you speak out of anger, it's just going to escalate the situation. The other person's going to lash out at you. The discussion is no longer going to be proactive. It's going to be destructive. And you know when you're in this conflict, you know when it's getting personal. You know what I'm talking about here. You know enough to stop it, to walk away. Married couples, there's times, there just comes a point. There becomes a point when you're so mad, you're so into this, the emotions are so high, intense, that there's not a chance in the world that the conversation is going to be productive. It's not going to happen. Many times I have sat down with a couple and I said, hey, what's the issue? And I said, actually, don't tell me what you think the issue is. Let's go back an hour to what the issue was, because there was a lot of ignorance spoken from that point to this point, and now I'm involved and we don't need to deal with this. Let's go back to that. Because we get mad. It's not productive. So take a break, calm down. Now, of course, you're going to have to come back and you're going to have to discuss it. It's going to have to happen. That discussion needs to take place. I'm not saying avoid it, ignore it. I'm not saying that. But when you're mad, when you have anger, that's not the time to do it. When you're at work and you feel yourself getting upset, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Hold your tongue. You can put KMS on your paper. Keep mouth shut. And just trace it over and over and over. Do what you got to do, but don't respond when you're angry. Proverbs 15 says, a gentle answer deflects anger. Man, if you can be calm when everyone else is upset, if you can be calm, if you can speak calmly, you can diffuse the most tense situation. But look at the alternative here in Proverbs. A gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. We got to control. We got to control our tongue. We never need to speak out of anger. Now, let me point out real quickly a quick side note here. It's not just the words that you use. It's the tone of your voice. It's your body language. It's your facial expressions. I'm not talking about just suppressing your anger either here. I mean, holding your tongue is always a good idea. When you're angry, keeping your trap shut is the best idea. But also control your nonverbal communication. So if we're going to embrace God-honoring conflict, first, we always listen first. Second, we never speak out of anger. And then third, value the relationship over the resolution. This is so important. And it's also somewhat of a radical concept. It can really change, just this point here alone. Value relationship over resolution can really change the way that you handle conflict at home. It can change the way you handle conflict at work. It can change the way that you handle conflict with your friends. It goes back to one of the truths, biblical truths, to separate the person from the problem. It's possible to be okay with each other in the midst of conflict, even though you haven't settled the conflict. It's possible to be okay with one another. The problem is, oftentimes we value the resolution over the relationship. If we're honest, that there are times when we value the resolution over the relationship. And this can be the absolute worst thing we can do in the most important relationships. But we need to ask ourselves, why am I so mad at my friend? Why am I so mad at my spouse? Well, Mike, you don't understand. This is really important to me. This is a big deal. Okay, it matters. But does it matter enough to throw the relationship away? Let's just start there. Whenever we have disagreements, and everyone's going to disagree, heck, even in the church we disagree. Disagreements happen. It's healthy to be able to disagree with someone, to not have resolution with someone, and still be okay with one another. See, when we can have conflict with each other and not have resolution with each other, but still okay, that's a sign of spiritual maturity. We have to decide that our relationship is more important than the resolution. We've got to choose the person over the problem. We may disagree. We may not have it all worked out. But you have this mentality, and you actually have to say this. Say, man, we're not okay. We're not in a good place right now. There's conflict in this relationship, but man, give us a little time, and we'll have it worked out. Give us a little time, and we will be okay. That's a sign of spiritual maturity. When we learn to value the relationship over the resolution, this next verse that you've heard before, this next verse becomes much easier. Ephesians 4. Don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry. Have you ever heard this and thought, I mean, let's be honest with you. How many of you have ever thought, man, I'm never going to get any sleep. I'm going to be up all night. We got to settle this. We have to agree on this. It's 10:30. This isn't going to happen. And then what happens? You get angrier and angrier. But look what the verse actually says. It does not say, don't go to bed until conflict is resolved. It doesn't say that. And it's a good thing because you wouldn't sleep much. It says, make sure that your relationship is right before the end of the day. Man, this cold's killing you. If there's a disagreement going on, sometimes you guys say, well, okay, we're not going to settle this right now. We're not going to settle this today, and that's okay. Can we deal with it tomorrow? Can we deal with it the day after? We haven't settled it, but we're okay. Colossians chapter 3 says this, make allowance for each other's faults. Just stop there. If you're going to have such successful relationships, you have to understand the other person isn't going to be perfect, and neither are you. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. We've discussed this before, that if you're a disciple of Jesus, you're a follower of Jesus, this is not a suggestion that he makes. This is a command. Jesus says, hey, Mike, I have forgiven you when you didn't deserve it, so I'm commanding you to forgive others even if they don't deserve it. Make allowance for each other's faults. How do I embrace God honoring conflict? I listen first. I don't speak in anger. I value relationship over resolution. Fourth, I seek godly compromise. Sometimes when we hear this word compromise, we think weakness. And it's not weakness at all. And I'm not talking about compromising what you believe in. That's why I put the word godly in there. Godly compromise. See, compromise is a sign of spiritual maturity. It's a sign of godly wisdom. Most of the conflict, if we're honest, most of the conflict that we have in our life is the result of pride that we have in ourselves. Proverbs 13 says, pride leads to conflict. I actually want you to add a word in your mind to that scripture. Add it to the front of the verse. Add the word my. My pride leads to conflict. My pride, that feeling that I always have to be right, or I always have to have my way, or I always have to get the last word. I'm not going to budge. You got to do what I want to do. That's always going to lead to a fight. That's always going to lead to conflict. It's going to lead to broken relationship. That's why I have to be willing to lay down my pride and seek godly compromise. As we've talked about before, sometimes in compromise, we've got to meet someone halfway. A lot of you can relate to this. When you get married, what do you do at the holidays? Lock up was alternate years. That's a compromise. At work, you're going to have to compromise. Strive for the path of compromise. Remember, we've talked about the compromise doesn't mean it's always 50-50. Compromise can be 100 and 0, or 0 and 100. If it's important to them and you don't really care, let them lead in it. Let them run with them. Let them take it. Don't let selfishness, don't let pride get in the way. See, there's a familiar verse in Philippians that we know, and that's really what's at the heart of this verse. Philippians chapter 2 says, don't look out only for your own interest. That's pride. Looking out for yourself. Got to have it my way. I'm the most important. The world revolves around me. You're lucky you get to be in my world. I'm living for me. I'm looking out for me. God says don't do that. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. We need to care about other people. It's all about relationships. Relationships matter. So some questions you can ask yourselves are things like, is this something that I'm okay with? Is this something I can live with? Can I just let this go? Does it really matter? Is this really worth having a conflict over? Or could I let it go and move on? Now, I'm not talking about where you lie to yourself and you take that, I'm okay at that conflict we're having, and you put it in your backpack and then eventually you explode. That's not what I'm talking about. Be honest with yourself. Am I okay with this? Because seeking godly compromise is worth it. And don't misunderstand this idea of compromise. It doesn't mean you're wrong and they're right. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you value the person over the problem. That you value the relationship more than the resolution. Now, I'm not talking about getting walked on. I'm not talking about being a doormat here. But we don't always have to have our way. Godly compromise. So God honoring conflict. First, I listen. Second, I never speak out of anger. I value the relationship over resolution. I seek godly compromise. And then last, I surrender the relationship to God. Our entire series on relationships, everything we've talked to has been leading us to this point. If you want your relationships to be the absolute best they can be, if you want them to be happy, healthy, successful relationships, then you got to surrender the relationship to God. You got to dedicate it to God. You got to ask God for his help in this relationship. Psalm 37 says, commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust him, and he will help you. Dedicate it to him. So I ask you this morning, what relationship do you need to surrender to God? What relationship are you having conflict in, and you need to turn it over to him? Is it at work? Is it with a family member? Is it a marriage thing? Is it with your spouse? Is it someone here at the church? Well, what is it that you need to turn over to God, and you need to ask him to help you, to give you wisdom, to deal with this situation? See, the truth is, conflict is unavoidable. Conflict in your relationships, man, it's just unavoidable. We're not always going to agree, and that's okay. And we're going to fight, and that's okay. Just because you have conflict doesn't mean that you can't have a God-honoring relationship. It doesn't mean that the conflict we have can't actually be a good thing in our life. It doesn't mean that that conflict can't strengthen our relationship. See, it is possible to go into a conflict and walk out of the conflict on the other side, both of you looking more and more like Jesus. It is possible. But for that to happen in any relationship, whether it's marriage, dating, relationship with the coworker, with your boss, whatever, it means bringing that relationship and placing it before God and saying, God, help me to do what you want me to do on my side of this equation, on my side of this relationship. It means bringing the relationship to God and trusting him with it. If you will surrender your relationships to God and trust him with them, and just do what he leads you to do, man, he can take what seems to be broken right now, and he can make something awesome out of it. He can take what seems to be broken right now and turn it into something beautiful. He can use this conflict that you're having as a catalyst to create something new, better, and stronger. So what I want to do is I want to wrap up our whole series where we started. I want to end this series by, go ahead and stand with me, all of us standing together, and we're going to read the scripture that we've used every single week. And then I'm going to pray for us, because this is what it's really about. Read Proverbs 3 with me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for your love. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for walking with us each and every day. Lord, relationships aren't always easy. Relationships aren't always simple. Conflict is going to happen, but that doesn't mean it's bad. There is conflict out there that is God-honoring, that honors you, that honors the other person. Lord, help us to take the steps that we need to take, because at the end of the day, in conflict, all we can do is control our side of the equation. And we can want what the other person should be doing. We can want that all we want, but if they don't do it, it doesn't excuse us to not do what you've called us to do. Lord, help us to take the steps that we need to take to have God-honoring conflict. A conflict that can happen where we come out on the other side stronger, better. Our relationship is better. Lord, I just pray that your Spirit would speak to us in a very loud way, that as we feel anger rising, as we feel tension going up, our blood pressure going up, Lord, remind us that we can have conflict that honors you. Not only can we have it, I pray that we would take the steps that we need to take to walk through that conflict in a way that puts a smile on your face. Lord, help us to do just that. Lord, again, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for what you've done in our lives. And I just invite you into every area of our lives, each and every day. And all this I pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.